honeys, we are back at it again with some brand new Beesness for you here. All the buzz of the last calendar week, with the highlights selected by yours truly as always. Although we're catching up on our 6-24 Beesness just a little bit late because yours truly had moving to attend to, I hope you still find these headlines nice and juicy and refreshing. Let's begin. We've got some follow-ups to kick things off with today. The first is that Israel and Iran have both taken measures to safeguard their people and their cultural property amid escalating hostilities between the neighboring nations. Israel ordered the 300,000-ish residents of Tehran's government ministries district to evacuate ahead of the airstrikes, an order which was echoed by Trump on Monday and was met with the Iranian warning to Israeli citizens of cities including Haifa and Tel Aviv that they may be in danger. According to local reports, Iran's Deputy Minister of Cultural Heritage, Tourism and Handicraft, Ali Darabi, told local media he had directed, quote, custodians of artifacts, unquote, to follow crisis protocols, including the transfer of museum objects to secure storage locations across the nation. Iran's National Cultural Heritage Organization has closed museums and heritage sites until further notice. Following Iran's retaliatory strikes on Tel Aviv, several Israeli art institutions also transferred valuable works and artifacts to protected spaces on Friday. According to a museum spokesperson for the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, they also initiated their wartime protocols early Friday morning, moving every piece on display into underground facilities. Both it and the Israel Museum of Jerusalem are closed indefinitely. The Society for Iranian Archaeology, a non-governmental academic group dedicated to the care and study of the nation's archaeological and cultural heritage, published a statement on Monday that Art News writes, quote, condemned the military attacks on Iran and urged all parties to adhere to international humanitarian laws that constitute the intentional targeting and destructing of cultural property as war crimes, end quote. They also called for coordinated emergency measures by UNESCO, the Blue Shield, and the International Council on Monuments and Sites. We additionally learned that the Grand Egyptian Museum has delayed its grand opening again, likely due to quote-unquote current regional developments. Though it was planned for July 3rd, the Egyptian Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli announced on Saturday of last week that the museum's full launch will take place in the last quarter of this year instead. The grand opening has been delayed more than once since plans for the museum were announced in 1992 due to things like COVID, internal economic struggles, political unrest. Though Madbouli blamed quote-unquote regional developments, it's pretty clear this delay is unofficially due to the outbreak of war between Israel and Iran. Our source for today, Art News, writes that the quote institution said it decided to postpone the official inauguration out of a national responsibility in what will hopefully be a more auspicious time, end quote, meaning that although this grand opening is mostly for pomp and circumstance because some sections of the 81,000 square foot museum have already been open since 2010, it's still important pomp and circumstance. It's patriotic, nationalistic pomp and circumstance, and I understand, especially with it being such a long work in progress, why they would want to celebrate that appropriately. In the meantime, you can enjoy the Conservation Studios operational since 2010, the Contemporary program opened in 2023, and the several other galleries that were opened last fall. We also learned last week that New York's Elizabeth Street Garden has been saved from demolition. As we reported, the garden's executive director, Joseph Reaver, has fought for years against a proposal to flatten the garden to build affordable housing for low-income LGBTQ+ seniors, but he was served an eviction notice in October in preparation for the construction of the project called Haven Green. First Deputy Mayor Randy Mastro told journalists of the deal in a news conference on June 23rd. The city will instead build approximately 620 affordable housing units at 3 alternative sites in Lower Manhattan, sparing the beloved green space and building 5 times more housing units than the Haven Green project plans. The agreement does stipulate that Elizabeth Street Garden must add 2 hours at least in the evening so the public can visit from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily. It also includes an option for the garden to become part of the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation at a later time. An important note, however, this agreement depends on the successful rezoning of the new properties where the housing will be built, and those final zoning changes are determined by the City Council. We'll let you know what the ultimate decision is. And our final follow-up, we heard that the Ringling Museum will stay under control of the Florida State University for now. Florida lawmakers dropped Republican Governor Ron DeSantis' highly contested proposal from his preliminary spending plan for the 2025-2026 fiscal year to transfer control of the institution from Florida State to the new College of Florida, instead passing the state's $115.1 billion budget plan without that transfer. And against some other proposals, according to Hyperallergic, quote, in addition to this failed transfer, another proposal that would have seen NCF absorb the University of South Florida's Sarasota Manatee 32-acre campus was also left out of this legislative session, end quote. The approximately 2,500 members of Citizens to Protect the Ringling, made up of local Sarasota residents, donors, museum trustees, and more, celebrated the success of their campaign against the proposal after this news broke. The group's president, Nancy Parrish, a former Ringling board chair, praised the group's efforts as, quote, grassroots advocacy at its finest, end quote, and additionally thanked Republican Senator Jim Boyd for publicly opposing the proposal and helping block its inclusion from the final budget. However, a new merger is on the horizon, one between the Orange County Museum of Art and UC Irvine. The statement from the branch of University of California last week confirmed its desire to establish a new model for public arts engagement via education. It reads in part, quote, a non-binding exploratory letter of intent has been signed and the two organizations continue to develop a definitive agreement pending approval of the University of California Board of Regents, end quote. This merger is being seen as unusual, surprising, because it does not actually appear to be due to financial strife or emergency from the Orange County Museum of Art, as would usually be the case in this situation. That proposal will be voted on in fall of this year. Another bit of good news, after a months-long dispute, security guards at 3 London museums have secured a pay raise. The news broke a few days later that on June 14th, these staff members secured pay raises ranging from 13 to 23% after the guards at the National History, Science and Victoria and Albert museums staged more than 50 days of walkouts over what they claimed was quote-unquote stagnant pay. The Why We Care here? The United Voices of the World Union rep statement said in part, quote, since the union submitted a pay claim in the fourth quarter of 2024, the guards have gained more ground than they had in the previous 10 years combined. This includes overcoming 6 years of frozen wages, an employer that failed to address low pay, and delayed the implementation of the London living wage, end quote. Congratulations to those guards, those security forces. Romania has also won a quote-unquote long-term hold on a disputed El Greco. The work in question, titled St. Sebastian and completed between 1610 and 1614, was pulled from Christie's February New York Old Masters sale following claims that the work was unlawfully taken from Romania's national collection back in 1947. Court filings have revealed that the work is currently owned by Monaco-based Russian billionaire Dmitry Rybolovlev, and the painting itself will remain at Christie's New York, quote, until Romania's recovery efforts are heard and resolved by the proper legal authorities, end quote, according to the law firm representing the nation. And a very major headline from last week, the Louvre Museum temporarily closed as its exhausted staff went on strike. The strike itself occurred behind closed doors during the routine June 16th meeting as a form of staff protests over over-tourism and understaffing. Tourists hoping to visit the museum that day were left in the dark about the closure's reasons and waited outside for hours to enter as the strike went on from 9 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Hype Art writes, quote, gallery attendants, ticket agents, and security refused to work in protest over uncontrollable crowds, understaffing, and what was referred to by a union as a, quote, untenable working environment, end all quotes. Christian Galani, spokesperson for the CGT Culture Labor Union, which includes Louvre workers, told the New York Times, quote, we didn't plan to go on strike, but the people are so exhausted they can't support the conditions getting worse and worse, end quote. Another union representative, Sarah Sefian, pointed out that though there are renovations to the Louvre planned, they are not short-term fixes. She stated, quote, we can't wait 6 years for help. Our teams are under pressure now. It's not just about the art, it's about the people protecting it, end quote. We also learned that Australian politicians are protesting UNESCO's concerns over a gas project located near ancient rock art. UNESCO is seeking to combat the proposed expansion of the Karatha gas plant, which is nearby to 1 million petroglyphs located in Murujuga, by putting these millennia-old works on its World Heritage List. They did so under the advice of the International Council of Monuments and Sites, which said in a May report that the Murujuga rock art is, quote, vulnerable due to industrial emissions, considered the majorly adversely affecting factor for the petroglyphs, end quote. But local politicians disagree with this move and are looking to get around it. The Guardian reported this week that Murray Watt, the environmental minister of Australia, is personally seeking to get UNESCO to reject some of the International Council's claims. Meanwhile, the Australian government has said the art is in overall good condition and does not show signs of suffering from acid rain or deposition. It claims most of this impact was due to pollution in the 1970s and 80s. Furthermore, says the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the operator of the plant, Woodside Energy, has said it will achieve net zero operations operations by 2050 and that the project will aid in Australia's transition away from coal energy. The petroglyphs' listing with UNESCO and resulting impacts to the plant expansion plans are TBD until next month's Paris meeting between members of the Murujuga Aboriginal Corporation and other Australian delegates to argue for the Rock Arts World Heritage Site listing. Now, honeys, you might disagree with this next headline. You might find it unsavory, but it is the news and we're going to report it. A UN report has revealed that the Israeli attacks on Palestinian heritage sites do constitute war crimes. An independent investigation conducted by a United Nations Commission, the International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel, concluded that the attacks, quote, amount to war crimes and the crime against humanity of extermination, end quote. The committee further determined Israel has, quote, obliterated Gaza's education system and destroyed over half of all religious and cultural sites in the Gaza Strip, end quote, with the report's authors attributing that statistic to Israel's, quote, wider campaign of devastation of civilian targets and infrastructure, end quote. The report acknowledges not only that this damage has a sort of snowballing effect, but that it, quote, deeply affects intangible cultural elements such as religious and cultural practices, memories, and history, end quote. Art News says the investigation paid special attention to 10 religious and cultural sites in Gaza that constituted, quote unquote, civilian objects at the time of the attacks in late 2023 and suffered, quote, devastating destruction, end quote, for which investigators could not determine a legitimate military need. For example, the seizure, looting, and bulldozing of Gaza's first archaeological museum, the Al-Madhaf Museum, which was home to a private antiquity collection. The report also looked into some of Israel's policies and behaviors in the West Bank, like the establishment of illegal settlements in Palestinian World Heritage sites and legislative attempts to transfer control of Palestinian archaeological and cultural sites to the Israel Antiquities Authority. The report ended with recommendations that the Israeli government, quote, immediately end the unlawful occupation of Palestinian territory, seize all new settlement plans and activities, remove all settlers and settlements as rapidly as possible in compliance with the UN's International Court of Justice advisory opinion of July 2024, and remove all obstructions to the full exercise of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, end quote. Reuters reports, as we might expect, that representatives of the Israeli government described the UN's report as, quote, an attempt to promote its fictitious narrative of the Gaza war, end quote. Art News reports that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected the court's ruling in a statement that claimed the, quote, legality, end quote, of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, quote, cannot be disputed, end quote. If this weren't such a serious situation, I might find that bit of ego, this Prime Minister's complete dismissal of the UN, a bit funny. But it is serious, so not funny. And now switching gears on the preservation stories, photographer Cindy Sherman has stepped forward with a public offer to destroy and reprint her old photographs as a means of preserving her works. The so-called Cindy Sherman Legacy Project, launched on June 16th, is introducing a new means of preserving the physical and conceptual integrity of her work. It's a formal process for condition assessments and the controlled replacement of damaged prints. Sherman herself described the project to the Art newspaper as, quote, a mechanism that will ensure the integrity of my work is protected in perpetuity, end quote. The magazine writes that this first initiative of its kind in photography could set a new benchmark for legacy care among artists working in lens-based media. The project will also host an online catalog raisonné documenting her career. According to Margaret Lee, the director of the Cindy Sherman Legacy Project, the timing of its launch reflects Sherman's long-standing concern about the fragility of photographic materials. Quote, by launching this initiative now, Sherman can weigh in on how best to adapt her work to the ever-changing landscape of photographic printing technology, end quote. Another exciting announcement from last week, Vancouver-based collector and businessman Bob Rennie has donated 61 works collectively valued at 22.8 Canadian million, or 16.8 of our million, to the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa after 18 months of planning. The donation includes artworks by Ai Weiwei, Mona Hatoum, Dan Graham, and Rodney Graham, and Rennie had previously made the museum's largest private donation of works at 13 Canadian million, or 9.6 US million dollars, to the gallery in 2017 in honor of Canada's 150th anniversary, which admittedly is one of the reasons this headline caught our eye. The latest gift brings the total value of his and his family's gifts to the National Gallery of Canada to more than 35 million Canadian dollars, or 25.7 million of ours, via these 260 artworks donated since 2012. The Art newspaper also writes that the timing and selections of gifted works by notable Canadian and international artists seems quote-unquote auspicious given the current geopolitical tensions between Canada and the U.S. They point to the inclusion of Yinka Shonibari's The American Library of 2018 as, quote, offering a boldly colorful rejoinder to U.S. President Donald Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric. Comprised of around 6,000 books of different sizes wrapped in Dutch wax-printed cotton, it includes 3,200 books featuring the names of immigrants or their descendants who have influenced American culture, including one Donald J. Trump of Scottish and German heritage, end quote. Also being launched in the near future, an arts and culture magazine by Chanel. In advance of its centenary celebrations, the fashion house is strengthening its cultural initiatives in part by launching an arts and culture magazine led by Chanel's Culture Fund and president of the Arts, Culture, and Heritage at the brand, Yana Peel. The publication will reportedly, quote, revisit the brand's work with artists and cultural institutions in the last 5 years, end quote, as well as provide insights from these creatives on the future. Our sources describe this publication as, quote, a visual feast with multiple paper types across 250 pages produced in English, end quote. I don't know about you, but I'm excited to get my hands on my own copy. And the Getty made its own announcement Wednesday of its Global Art and Sustainability Fellowship Program, which will support 15 cultural and scientific organizations across 6 continents for a 2-year cycle, as well as early career professionals and visual artists focused on climate resiliency. These institutions include the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the Guggenheim Bilbao in Spain, James Cook University in Australia, and the Museo Paraense Emilio Goeldi in Brazil. Catherine Fleming, president and CEO of the J. Paul Getty Trust, described it as, quote, one part of a much larger holistic approach by Getty around sustainability, and, quote, it will work to identify critical sustainable management of heritage resources and implement them at participating cultural institutions to raise awareness around climate resilience and to disseminate information on climate action, among other efforts. And we have a great explanation of why this all matters from Scott Herron, professor of physics at James Cook University and co-developer of the Climate Vulnerability Index assessment tool on World Heritage properties. He is also the UNESCO chair on climate change vulnerability of natural and cultural heritage. Quote, we urgently need more qualified professionals in heritage sustainability, so our first Getty Global Fellow will focus on expanding training to accelerate CVI implementation in high-needs areas around the world, end quote. They are also notably collaborating with First Nations peoples to tailor the CVI approach to the perspectives of Indigenous groups whose lands and seas are often these same zones of elevated risk. Also last week, the Palazzo Mafia Museum in the Italian city of Verona released footage of visitors sitting on and crushing a Van Gogh chair. The video footage, captured back in April, shows a man pretending to sit on the artwork for a picture taken by the woman before losing his balance and actually sitting on it. The chair, of course, folded under his weight, and the couple dashed out of the museum. The artwork in question by Italian artist Nicola Bolla is a tribute to Vincent van Gogh's 1888 painting of a simple chair and is titled Van Gogh's Chair. It was made in 2008 from polished machine-cut glass decorated with crystals held together by foil. It was displayed with a no-touch warning. The artist himself was quoted by Hyperallergic saying that after being crushed, quote, it reminded me of Czechoslovakian Cubism, which has furniture made like this with all the legs bent, end quote. The museum has refused to divulge the value of the artwork, though it has since been restored and returned to view in the museum. Police have been notified, but the 2 suspects remain unidentified. Vanessa Carlon, the museum's director, was pretty calm about this in her statement, saying, quote, sometimes we lose our brains to take a picture and we don't think about the consequences. Of course it was an accident, but these 2 people left without speaking to us. That isn't an accident. This is a nightmare for any museum, end quote. And alas, that was not the only artwork damage headline we had last week. Security footage from the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, widely shared across the web, shows a visitor tearing a hole in a 17th century portrait of Tuscan Prince Fernando de' Medici after stumbling backwards over a barrier wire during an attempt to mimic the subject's pose for a selfie. While attempting to catch his balance, he put his hand right through the canvas. This particular incident occurred Saturday, June 21st, and the work was by Baroque painter Anton Domenico Gabbiani. It was completed between 1695 and 1700. The painting was removed from the exhibition it was on display in for repairs, but is expected to return to public view sometime after the reopening of this show on July 2nd. The visitor has been identified by Italian police and reported to judicial authorities. He may face criminal charges in addition to covering the cost of the repairs. The public statement in this case by museum director and exhibition co-curator Simone Verde included an acknowledgement that the, quote, problem of visitors who come to museums to make memes or take selfies for social media is very widespread, end quote, Verde seemed a little less sympathetic, going on to say, quote, we will set very precise limits, preventing behaviors that are not compatible with the sense of our institutions and respect for cultural heritage, end quote, meaning it's likely we will see the Uffizi ramping up its policies in the next few weeks. And last but not least, climate protesters splashed pink paint on Pablo Picasso's L'Ether of 1901 on June 19th at the Montreal Museum of Fine Art. The work was thankfully protected from damage by protective glass. Montreal police forces confirmed the arrest of a 21-year-old man for mischief after being called to the museum by security personnel around 10 a.m. when the paint splashing occurred. The museum briefly closed the exhibition to visitors and reopened an hour and a half later with the artwork removed from display for cleaning. In a video of the protest event posted by the environmentalist group Last Generation Canada on X/Twitter, the individual affiliated with the organization and identified as Marcel delivers a brief speech decrying the 200-plus wildfires currently raging across western and northern Canada just before taking the action. The two individuals who filmed the vandalism were detained but were released without charges later. The fires themselves have burned at least 8 million acres so far, forcing tens of thousands of residents to evacuate their homes just 2 years after fires burned more than 45 million acres in the country's 13 provinces and territories. The climate group's press statements called for the formation of a Canadian Climate Disaster Protection Agency and reads in part, quote, the social contract is broken. It's time for Canadians to disrupt business as usual to ensure our protection and make the rich pay for what they've done, end quote. And finally, to close us out, a couple of obituaries. First for Joel Shapiro, who passed on Saturday, June 14th at the age of 83. His death was announced by Pace Gallery, which has represented him since 1992, while his daughter informed New York Times that the cause was acute myeloid leukemia. Pace Gallery founder Arnie Glimcher stated, quote, his early sculptures expanded the possibilities of scale, and in his mature figurative sculptures, he harnessed the forces of nature themselves, end quote. The cosmetics billionaire and arts patron, Leonard Lauder, also passed away the same day. The cosmetics company announced his passing the following day at age 92 in his Upper East Side residence in Manhattan. Lauder's arts patronage is legendary, yet he came under fire in the last few years of his life for his family's political affiliations and support of the Israeli government. Lauder promised his collection of 78 Cubist artworks to the Met, marking the museum's largest single philanthropic gift in its history. He also served as a trustee and later chairman emeritus of the Whitney Museum of American Art and helped the museum acquire hundreds of works, in part by gifting 760 of his own. But Lauder was also recently named in demonstrations for Palestine at the Whitney. He faced scrutiny for evading state taxes, as revealed in a 2021 ProPublica report as well. And there is your makeup buzz, honeys. Thank you for your patience with me in my very hectic time of life right now. I appreciate your support, your concern, your interest in all things art. As always, in this summertime heat, hydrate or dihydrate. Be sure you're taking care of yourselves. Use sunscreen, all that. We'll talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.